Kelly came home in a bad mood because she hadn't passed an important exam at university today. And on the way home, a passing car splashed her from a puddle. Coming out of the kitchen to meet her was her fiancé, eager to greet his bride. "Hey, my darling. How are you? Did you pass the exam? Shall we celebrate? I have a turkey in the oven ready soon, and there's champagne in the fridge along with a cherry cake." Stephen asked with a smile. Kelly felt so embarrassed and upset in front of her fiancé that she threw her keys on the shelf and burst into tears. "No, I didn't pass the exam. The professor reminded me of all my missed classes, overdue papers. He started asking me additional questions, and I couldn't answer them. He deliberately set it up so I wouldn't pass this exam. The professor told me to come back for a retest in a month. And what if I can't pass the exam the second time? Then I'll be expelled from university, and I'll spend my whole life selling notebooks and magazines with these hands. Why do you need such a bride? That's why you haven't introduced me to your parents yet, right? You must be ashamed of me. Our relationship is so strange. We're getting married soon, and we haven't even met each other's parents. Is that normal? Just admit that you don't want to marry me." Kelly spoke, crying even harder, feeling like she was surrounded by so many problems. Hearing his bride's words, Stephen hugged her tightly, allowing her to cry on his shoulder, while he gently stroked her hair and comforted her like a little child. "Oh, you silly girl. You've bundled all the problems together. You've imagined terrible scenarios for yourself. Let's sort this out step by step. You didn't pass the exam. That's disappointing. I understand, but it's not the end of the world. Next time you'll prepare better and definitely pass the exam in that subject. I'm partly to blame too. I apologize. While preparing for our wedding, you've spent less time on your studies. You'll definitely get your university degree. Don't doubt it, because you're a smart girl. And I haven't introduced you to my parents, not because I'm ashamed of you. You know that my relationship with my father isn't very good, and he has a difficult personality. And I have an even worse relationship with my stepmother. I worry he might say something unnecessary to you, that's all. But my parents know I'm getting married. As for your mom, I haven't had a chance to meet her personally yet because she lives in another city, and my work schedule is hectic. You know that yourself. But we talk regularly on the phone. I even asked her permission to marry you, and she, by the way, didn't object. So why did you think our relationship is complicated? Remember, the most important thing is that I love you very much, and I don't need anyone else, and we will definitely get married and live happily ever after. It's just been a bad day today. Are you feeling better now? Let's go have dinner together. Will you make a salad to go with the turkey?" After Stephen's words, Kelly did calm down. She hugged him and, kissing him, said, "And I love you very much too. And I'm so afraid of losing you. You know, my mom and I have never been wealthy people. We've always struggled financially. So I enrolled in an online program at university to be able to study and work at the same time, to make it easier for my mom. But I hate working in this store so much. I can't wait to get my diploma and find a job in my field. And now, I couldn't pass the last exam, so I got upset. I'm also worried that your relatives won't like me. You see, my mom and I are simple folks, and your parents are from high society. And our wedding is coming up soon. I'm very nervous. Okay, I won't cry anymore. Let's go to the table. I'm hungry." They had dinner together, discussed the details of the upcoming wedding, and came to the agreement that they should organize a joint evening so that both the newlyweds and their parents could get to know each other. Then the phone rang. Stephen's uncle called. They hadn't seen each other for many years. He lived abroad and had only recently decided to come back home for a short visit. After talking to his uncle, he immediately began to get ready to go somewhere and warned Kelly. "Kelly, my Uncle George invited me over to his house. Said we need to talk about something important. I'll go to him. I'll be back soon. He's leaving in the morning, and we won't have a chance to see him. The guy did come home 2 hours later, but he seemed nervous and upset. Kelly noticed it right away and asked, "Stephen, what's wrong with you? Are you upset about something? I can see you're troubled." Stephen sighed and replied sadly, "My uncle told me some news. I grew up without my mom. Everyone told me she abandoned us and left for another man, and this topic was taboo in our family. But Uncle George just told me that it wasn't like that at all. That it was my father who kicked Mom out of the house and deceived her, intimidated her, so she disappeared forever. You know, I believe him. And now I despise my father even more. How could he do that to Mom?" "Stephen, don't speak like that. You are blaming your father without even figuring out who's telling the truth and who's lying. Maybe it's not all so straightforward. After all, so many years have passed, and perhaps we just need to have a sincere conversation with your father and sort everything out. Why make up something?" countered the girl. Stephen waved his hand confidently and said, "You just don't know my father. It's impossible to have a sincere conversation with him. He only has his own truth and opinion. All right, let's go to sleep. I have to get up early for work tomorrow. Let's put off these news for later. There's enough of our own problems right now. The wedding is a serious matter. We need to prepare for it properly." Kelly decided not to delve further into this topic, tactfully choosing not to interfere in problems that didn't concern her. Why offer advice when nothing is clear at the moment? She hugged her fiancé and fell asleep right away, feeling safe and calm in his arms. But Stephen couldn't sleep. He remembered fragments of his childhood and youth, and they wouldn't let him rest. Stephen barely remembered his own mother. He was only 3 years old when she disappeared from his life. But he remembered how she used to stroke his head with her warm hand and softly sing him a lullaby before bed. He remembered walking hand in hand with her, laughing, eating delicious ice cream while holding balloons in the other hand. And he vividly remembered her voice. She used to tell him so often, "I love you, my little son." But he was also haunted by memories of arguments between his parents and how his mother cried. Those moments were very scary for Stephen. He would cover himself with a blanket and hug his stuffed bunny tightly. His father, on the other hand, was always a stern man. He never indulged Stephen, and when he spoke to his son, it seemed like he was scolding him. He was a successful businessman, accustomed to a certain behavior, expecting obedience and submission from those around him. Of course, he loved his son. He bought him everything, took him to various extracurricular activities, but he believed that a boy should grow up to be a man from childhood, not a child. Then their home was invaded by a stepmother, Margaret. Stephen didn't like her from the first sight, and the feeling was mutual. He teased her, calling her, when she wasn't around, a nasty fish, as he thought she was just as slippery and cold as a fish. Once she moved in with them, the woman immediately took charge and bossed everyone around, scolding the servants and refusing to interact with the boy. At first, little Stephen refused to accept that his stepmother would live with them. He threw tantrums, had fits, and begged his father to bring back his mom. He missed her so much. One day, the boy deliberately used bright markers to paint Margaret's glossy handbag so she would get upset, leave, and never return to their home. And then Donald rudely sat his son opposite him on a chair and scolded the child. "So, son, remember this. There should be no more talk about your mom in this house. She abandoned us and went to her lover. She betrayed us, and we don't need her anymore, understood? Margaret is my wife, and your new mother, and you will obey her in everything and stop throwing tantrums. I'm tired of it. I love you and take care of you, and it will always be like this. But you must respect my choice and accept that Margaret will live with us. Do you understand? Otherwise, I'll lock you in your room, and you'll sit there alone until you agree with my choice. Now go to your room and play with the nanny. Your French tutor will come to you soon." From that day on, Stephen never mentioned his mother's name again. He became a bit withdrawn. He studied well and tried not to upset his father, preferring simply not to interact with his stepmother. But the boy always felt uncomfortable and out of place at home. He felt like he was just going through the motions, mechanically. He could never relax, and it bothered him. Nobody even asked him what he wanted to eat for lunch or dinner. He was just called to the table, and that was it. The only close relative for Stephen, with whom he could have sincere conversations, was his beloved grandmother, Anna. But for some reason, she didn't communicate with his father, and she was never invited to their house. However, she was occasionally allowed to see her grandson. Those were unforgettable moments for the boy. His grandmother was a smart and educated woman. She used to be a singing teacher at school. They laughed and played together on the old piano. Stephen played with the cat, ate fresh pies, and relaxed there, sharing his joys and difficulties. In her house, he could do anything. Lie on the couch, eat in front of the TV, or run around in the yard. His grandmother always listened attentively to her grandson and never told anyone his secrets. She was always ready to give advice. It was to her that he first confessed about falling in love. Anna was happy for her grandson and said, "What joy! My goodness! Look how my grandson has grown up. It's good, Stephen, that you're Kelly. A simple girl, not wealthy. You shouldn't be ashamed of that. I can't stand these snobbish girls nowadays. They only care about your money, and they can't give anything to a man themselves. But someone like Kelly will truly love you, become a good wife to you, and take care of the home." It seemed like his grandmother understood him. So Stephen continued to praise his fiancée. "You're always right, Grandma. Kelly is great. She works and studies, and she cooks food so wonderfully. She recently baked such a delicious pie. And the apartment is always clean. So, I decided that I want to marry her. I just don't know how to show Kelly's dad, how he'll react to an ordinary girl. It's even scary to think about. Don't be afraid of him. Think about your own future. It's your life. So fight for your love, and don't give up. I'll support you in everything," confidently exclaimed his grandmother. After talking to his uncle, Stephen decided to talk to his father about everything, to finally uncover the mystery of his mother's disappearance, which had troubled him all his childhood. But before that, as always, he wanted to consult with his grandmother and ask her about his mother. After all, in his childhood, when he asked about her, his grandmother would just sigh heavily and remain silent. The next day after work, Stephen bought his favorite croissants, fresh strawberries, and visited his grandmother. She was very happy about the visit since lately her grandson had been busy, and he didn't come to see her as often as before. Anna greeted her grandson with a hug, warmed up the food, and put the kettle on. Stephen was very nervous. He couldn't bring himself to ask the important question. But his grandmother knew him from childhood. So she asked him herself, "You didn't just come to visit me for no reason. Something happened. Don't stay silent. You know me. I'll understand everything." Stephen gathered his courage and said, "I recently met with Uncle George. He flew to our city for a short visit, and he told me something that kept me up all night. Uncle claims that my mom didn't abandon me, that it was Dad who deliberately made her disappear and lied to me about her. I wanted to ask you about how it really was. Maybe you know something. It's very important to me. I missed her so much in my childhood, and when I was a teenager, I even got angry with her and couldn't understand how she could treat her son like that. How could she leave her family? Can anyone live peacefully after that? And now I don't even know who was really right." Grandma frowned slightly, sighed, and began to tell. "It's good that you asked me about this, Stephen. You haven't been a child for a long time, and you should know the truth, even though I promised your father once to keep quiet. But then he threatened that he wouldn't let me see you, so I kept silent. But now you're an adult, and nobody can forbid us from seeing each other. and I have nothing to fear at my age. To make it clear to you, I'll start from the very beginning. You know how your dad achieved success, how he developed his business. I'm sure he told you that he did it all by himself. But that's a lie. Donald was my favorite and only son. But I must admit that I somewhat failed in his upbringing. In his childhood, he constantly got into trouble, hung out with the wrong crowd, didn't want to study, despite having excellent abilities. I didn't know what to do with him. I thought he would be expelled from university. I was tired of paying for his truancy at college, and it was embarrassing. I'm a teacher myself, but I couldn't handle my own son. But then he met Karen. They were in the same university group. She was such a wonderful girl. She excelled in her studies, came from a good family, decent, and most importantly, she fell in love with my son. She started helping him with all his subjects, and by talking to her, he stopped associating with bad people. I don't even know how she managed it. I couldn't have been happier with such a girl. And after they graduated from university, it was me who insisted that they get married, knowing that Donald couldn't find a better wife. It's just that my son apparently didn't love Karen as much as he let her love him. He was just fine with everything. The girl got a job at a large company as an accountant, and very soon she became the chief economist. She always tried to find good positions for my son. Thanks to her support, he first became deputy director, and then he even became the head of the company. Karen believed that she shouldn't hold positions higher than her husband's, so that he wouldn't feel inferior, and she constantly told him that Donald was the best man and that he could achieve anything. And my son really believed in himself. He started delving into business matters more and finally realized his potential. But the higher he rose in the company, the more his character deteriorated. Donald became a harsh man. He could yell at his wife, and sometimes even at me. And it seemed like he suddenly forgot that he could only achieve everything thanks to his wife. Karen and I often had sincere conversations, and she sometimes complained to me that Donald was becoming an aggressive man. He even tried to hit her a few times. I was going to talk to my son. I was terribly ashamed of his behavior, but Karen stopped me. She was afraid that if Donald found out that she was complaining about him to her mother-in-law, it would only get worse. And then Karen got pregnant. The pregnancy was difficult. She had constant swelling and morning sickness. But oh, how we all rejoiced when you were born. Of course, the bride recovered from her pregnancy, stayed home all the time, and spent all her time with you, giving up her career. Although she could have hired a nanny, like many girls do, she didn't. She often told me that she couldn't trust anyone with her son, and that she would go crazy with worry not knowing what was happening with you while she wasn't there. How she loved you, grandson. And Donald, on the contrary, became jealous of her. After all her attention was devoted to you, not to him. He started reproaching her, saying that she didn't look good anymore, that she wasn't taking care of herself, that she had gained weight. He stopped taking Karen to important meetings, as if he had become ashamed of her. In fact, I think he was annoyed that Karen was always smarter than him, although she didn't show it in public. And then he found himself a mistress. This Margaret, who was young, ambitious, and had a model-like appearance. It was then that my son stooped to deceit. He kicked Karen out of the house, started blackmailing her, threatening to forbid her from seeing you. Poor daughter-in-law didn't know how to make her husband reconsider. She was ready to leave with nothing, just to have you with her. But Donald couldn't be stopped. He didn't listen to anyone. He made her transfer her share in the business to him, and still deceived your mother. He took photos through acquaintances, on which he put your mother's face, as if she was cheating on him, not the other way around, and deprived her of her maternal rights. He paid off the judge, the jury, the witnesses, and he succeeded. I argued with my son, tried to explain everything to him. But Donald seemed to have gone mad. He scared me too, shouted at me, said that if I didn't stop talking about it, he wouldn't let me see you either. And I came to hate my own son and stop talking to him. You know that yourself. For years, I kept silent about everything, just to be able to communicate with you. I still can't believe that I gave birth to and raised such a horrible person. Forgive me, Stephen. Forgive me for everything. I'm so ashamed of my son's behavior. And your mother is the best woman. Just know that. I've thought about Karen many times. How is she? Where does she live? After all, Donald left her completely penniless and told her to move to another city. I never saw her again. Now you know everything. And what to do with this truth. You decide for yourself. The guy was shocked. It turns out his uncle didn't deceive him. Everyone around knew the truth and lied to him from his childhood. And yet he felt that his mother couldn't have left him on her own and betrayed him. She wasn't such a bad person. Grandma. What was she like? I don't remember her face at all. And there isn't a single photo of her in the house, as if she never lived there. Do I look like my mom? Tell me. Asked Stephen. Anna seemed to have been waiting for this question. She got up, opened the cupboard, and searched for something for a long time, then handed him an old yellowed photo and said, "Here, this is your mother, Karen. I kept this photo as a keepsake because your father burned all her photos." Stephen stared at the photo of his mother. She was such a beautiful woman. He thought she resembled a French actress, with her captivating eyes and kind smile. And in her hands, she held a delicate bouquet of flowers. He hugged the photo to himself and, holding back tears, said, "Thank you, Grandma, for telling me the truth. Can I take this photo? I really need it." Anna understood everything. She nodded in agreement, hugged her grandson, and said goodbye. After telling her grandson the truth, the old woman felt calmer. For many years, this terrible family secret tormented the elderly woman. She blamed herself in many ways, for not raising her son properly, for not being able to help Karen, for lying to her grandson about his mother for so many years. Stephen sat in the car for a long time, stroking the photograph, staring at his mother's familiar features, and talking to her as if she could hear him. "Forgive me, Mom. I didn't know anything, so I got angry with you. How could Dad treat you like that? Where are you now, Mom? How much I miss you. But you know, I won't say anything to Dad for now. What's the point? He has no conscience anyway. But after the wedding, I'll definitely look for you and find you. Trust me, Mom. And when I find you, then I'll say everything to Dad." After talking to his grandmother, he no longer felt like going to his father, although he wanted to express everything. But, on the other hand, the wedding was coming soon, and all these scandals would only complicate the situation further, and Kelly would be upset. Stephen just called his dad and expressed the opinion that it was time for them to meet his fiancée and her mother. It all seemed strange. His father promised to think about it, but there was only hidden irritation in his voice. Donald was furious. He walked around his office, nervously smoking his pipe and venting. How could Stephen grow up to be such a weak person? I'm sure it's his mother's character trait. He constantly believes in love. There's no love in life. There are only mutually beneficial relationships. Why does he need this poor girl? And he's planning to marry her. And what if I've already decided everything? My acquaintances are just waiting for me to tell them that my son is ready to marry their daughter. And they're such important people. And if we become relatives with them, I'll be able to achieve a lot in business. What do I tell people now? And I have no desire at all to meet this girl and her mother. What can I talk to her about? Margaret listened attentively to her husband's indignation, as she herself had no intention of dining with these poor people. And suddenly an idea popped into her cunning head. The woman exclaimed and said, "Donald, listen, let's play a prank on this family. Let them not forget that they are ordinary, poor people. Why not? If anything, we'll say it was a prank. I'm sure it'll be funny. I saw something like this on TV once, in a show. The businessman immediately listened to his wife and asked, "What interesting idea did you come up with? Tell me your plan." Margaret smirked cunningly and replied, "It's very simple. We'll invite them to dinner at a restaurant. Reserve a table. But instead of us, homeless people will come. We can choose the poorest ones. Can you imagine how all the restaurant guests will look at them? And what humiliation it will be for our future relative after dinner with homeless people. I think, no matter how foolish this woman is, she'll understand what we're hinting at, that we don't need poor relatives. And I'm sure all the restaurant guests will laugh at them. And after this meeting, she'll dissuade her daughter from the wedding herself. How do you like my idea?" Donald liked the idea, and he smiled, imagining this prank. And the actors were quickly found. It was only necessary to stop near the sitter dump and promise the homeless people a lot of money. Some pathetic man in old sweatpants with tousled hair and a drunken woman immediately agreed to play the groom's fake parents. They had nothing to lose. They were always happy to eat and drink for free. And they were also promised money for this. Meanwhile, Kelly's mom, Karen, was very nervous before dinner with Stephen's parents. She realized that it wasn't a joke and that she had to meet wealthy people, and in a restaurant, no less. Sorting through her things, the woman discovered that she didn't have a single decent dress. But she decided to buy a good dress for this meeting. After all, her daughter's wedding was coming soon, and she couldn't embarrass herself in front of the future in-laws. A friend with whom they worked together at the hospital did Karen's hair beautifully, and her dress remarkably harmonized with her blue eyes, while the low-heeled shoes accentuated her posture. "Karen, you still look great. You need to find a good man. You're always alone. Anyway, our boss likes you, but you just don't notice," said her friend. "Angela, don't make things up. No one likes me." "No, thank you. I've had enough of a terrible relationship with a man once. I still don't feel like getting into new ones. I'm calmer alone. But thanks for the hairstyle. It turned out very beautiful. I hope this meeting with the groom's parents goes well. I'm very nervous. I haven't seen Stephen personally, but I feel like he's a good guy. We talked on the phone once. He spoke so warmly and tenderly about my daughter, about how he loves her. But how the meeting with his parents will go, I don't know," Karen replied. Karen arrived at the restaurant on time, entered the establishment, and looked around slowly. It was so beautiful here, with high ceilings, stylish decor, beautiful paintings, lace tablecloths, and pleasant music. The administrator approached her and politely asked, "Good afternoon. Would you like to rest? Or would you like to book a table for an event?" Karen timidly asked, "My name is Karen. There should be a meeting with the parents of my daughter's fiancé here. We have dinner with them, and the table is already booked. Can you help me find them?" The restaurant administrator looked at her strangely and immediately replied, "Yes, everything is correct. The table is already set, and the guests are waiting for you. Come with me." Karen didn't understand anything. After all, there were two homeless people sitting at the table. A woman in a tattered hat and a dirty coat, and a man with a bruise under his eye, wearing a crumpled tracksuit of an indeterminate color. These couldn't be Stephen's parents. So this is how her future relatives greeted her. They decided to embarrass her. What a wonderful introduction to them. Karen certainly didn't expect such humiliation and disgrace from them. She even started to feel unwell. The woman understood what they were hinting at, that she should only communicate with homeless people. And the worst part was that Kelly and Stephen would arrive soon. This couldn't be allowed because it wasn't the boy's fault that his parents were so mean, and it would cause a scandal that Kelly would never forgive her fiancé for. Keeping her emotions in check, the woman immediately called her daughter. "Kelly, honey, you don't have to hurry to the restaurant. There's been a force majeure. The meeting is cancelled. We'll see each other another time. Nothing serious." Karen sighed and smiled at the administrator, saying, "Thank you. We'll manage from here. If the table is already set, I'll sit for a bit. We won't need the waiter anymore. Thank you. At first, the guests in the restaurant looked at them strangely, whispered, laughed, but then they stopped paying attention. Who and how relaxes is no one's business. The restaurant administrator couldn't do anything either. The table and all the treats were paid for in advance, and how the clients looked was no longer his concern. The woman sat down at the table and initiated the conversation with the stand-in parents of the groom. Good evening, dear guests. What are your names? And how did you end up here instead of my future relatives? The woman in the hat opened a bottle of expensive champagne with a familiar movement, drank a glass in one gulp, smiled, and said, "How wonderful. I really wanted to drink champagne. I almost died. My name is Cynthia. I've been living on the streets for a long time. I used to have a family and a child, but I'm to blame for everything myself. I chose the wrong path and lost everything. So what? I even like this life. I work as much as I want, and no one prohibits anything for me. Some wealthy man invited us here and gave us a lot of money. And why shouldn't we agree? Sometimes we go without food for several days, and here we were invited to eat delicacies. Who could refuse such an offer?" Karen also drank a glass of champagne, but more to recover from the shock and calm down a little. "All right, Mom, I understand everything about you. And you, sir, who are you? I must admit that your face seems very familiar to me. I've definitely seen you somewhere before. I have an excellent memory for faces, but where exactly I saw you, I can't remember. Tell me about yourself. I've always been interested in how people end up in such a situation and start living on the streets. I won't judge you. Once upon a time, I almost found myself in such a position. So I completely understand you. Since we're dining together, let's talk, rather than sitting silently at the table." The man blushed and began to tell his story. "I don't even know who I am myself. They call me Crow, probably because of my long nose and dark hair. 3 months ago, homeless people found me unconscious in a pit. At first, they thought I was dead, but realizing I was alive, they dragged me to spend the night with them. At that time, I had a terrible poisoning. As soon as I drank water, I started vomiting immediately, thought I was going to die. Brenda saved me. She used to be a medical worker. She started making a decoction of wormwood and gave it to me, constantly saying that this herb cures all diseases. I could barely drink it. It was very bitter, but little by little, I did start to feel better. The other homeless people constantly asked me who I was, where I was from, and I couldn't tell them anything. They managed to cure me somehow, thanks to them a lot, but I still haven't remembered anything. Now I'm living on the street. You would know how scary it is not to know anything about yourself." The man drank a glass of brandy, grimaced, and covered his face with his hands. And then Karen saw a very unusual tattoo on his wrist, and suddenly she exclaimed, "I remember you. You were treated in our therapeutic department a year ago for pneumonia. I'm sure of it. You have a very unusual tattoo. You were in a private ward in the hospital, and all the hospital staff helped you with everything, so you couldn't have been a homeless person. And you even confidently use cutlery. Observe etiquette rules. Where would you know them from if you had lived on the street all this time? Listen, I can help you. Would you like me to call right now and arrange with the management, and you'll go to the hospital? Jack is a very good person. He won't refuse me. We have excellent psychologists, psychotherapists who can examine you, and maybe then you'll remember everything. And maybe other doctors will recognize you too. I recognized you. And we'll find the appointment journal together and retrieve outpatient cards from the archive. We'll look at them together. And maybe you'll remember your last name. I've seen it happen in movies. Why don't we try?" The homeless man brightened up and, of course, nodded. "I agree to everything, just to remember something. Thank you, Karen, for deciding to help me. You know, I even went to the police, but no one wanted to deal with the problems of a homeless person. And anyway, I've long realized that a homeless person is not needed by anyone. And you decided to help me." Karen was so intrigued by this mysterious story with this man that she even stopped being angry with the groom's parents. Now she was in a hurry to help this man, so she invited him to stay overnight at her place, allowed him to wash up, change clothes, and the next day, after arranging with the management, she admitted him for treatment in the therapeutic department. The patient underwent examinations. He underwent a CT scan, received medication, hypnosis, and Crow began to remember some fragments from his past life. For example, how a certain woman played the piano, how he loved to have breakfast on a wooden terrace, and his favorite dishes were beef bourguignon and steaks. He also remembered how he drank freshly squeezed orange juice every morning, and it turns out he knew the brands of expensive wines well. He began to remember some snippets from his everyday life, but he still couldn't remember who he was exactly. The doctors insisted that if he saw a photo from his home or some important item for him, it would definitely help him restore his memory. But for now, under hypnosis, Crow managed to remember how he quarreled with someone named Roger. He shouted this name and insisted that he wouldn't give him anything. Karen retrieved the archive of outpatient cards of patients who were in their hospital department with pneumonia in a private ward, and began to review them together with the homeless man. There weren't many such people, and when they reached the medical card of a patient named Bruce, the man suddenly became animated and began to say the name aloud several times joyfully. "Karen, I think I'm Bruce. I feel it. And I also remembered that I had a dog, a German shepherd named Finn. My God, can it be that I'm starting to remember something? Can I really remember everything? I can't believe it." And then Karen suggested again, "Let's search the internet for information about you." How did I not think of that right away? Okay, we type in your data from the medical card and the city, and what do we see? Wow, you're not a homeless person at all. You're a well-known entrepreneur. There's even your photo. Look, read the information about yourself. Indeed, the news feed said that Bruce was the owner of a chain of hotels, a prominent businessman, and philanthropist who went missing. There were attached photos of an expensive mansion, hotels, and Bruce himself at some important meetings. And then there were phone numbers of the police station to contact if someone recognizes or sees this person. The man looked at the phone screen, and a tear rolled down his cheek. "It's me. Oh Lord. I remember everything. I can't believe it. Will everything be like before now? Can I really return to a normal life? And all thanks to you, Karen. It's the competitors who decided to get rid of me because an important tender was coming up soon, and whoever won it could significantly increase their income. My main competitor was Roger, and he's the one who orchestrated everything. He spiked my coffee with some poison because when I went out after meeting him, I started feeling unwell. After that, his associates took me to the outskirts of the city and hit me several times on the head to make sure I died, throwing me into a sewer pit. They clearly don't suspect that I managed to survive. I imagine Roger is happy right now. He's probably already ruined my entire business. I need to check this. I should have enough money in my accounts to fix everything. They won't get away with it. I'll go to the police tomorrow, give my testimony, and Roger will be charged. He'll answer for everything he did to me. I'm very grateful to you, Karen. I've reconsidered a lot in life. Before, I always thought only about my career, worked constantly, and believed that was the main thing for a man, that only that way could I assert myself. But now, after experiencing hunger and wandering on the streets, seeing how other people live, I understand what a fool I was. I was always trying to achieve leadership, changing mistresses. And when trouble struck me, no one bothered to look for me because I have no family. That's what I should have been thinking about. Family. Well, nothing. Now I'll fix everything. I'll start a new life. And I'll also open a volunteer center to help homeless people because they go hungry for days. And a plate of hot soup can sometimes save someone's life. And know this, Karen, I'm not letting you go anywhere. You inspire me. Bruce quickly readjusted after remembering everything. He regained his rights in the business, and most importantly, his faithful dog awaited him at home. The gardener recounted that the dog hardly ate or went for walks while his owner was away, often lying down with his head on his front paws. But as soon as the dog saw Bruce, Finn immediately jumped up, wagging his tail like crazy, licking Bruce's face and hands with joy. Karen was very glad she could help a good person. Actually, Bruce appealed to her a lot, both as a person and as a man. But she tried not to dwell on it, remembering her past love failures. She didn't want to experience that pain again. Now it was time to think about her daughter's wedding, as there was only a week left. And she also needed to make sure the groom's parents understood once and for all that it's not okay to mistreat ordinary people. Karen decided to play them at their own game, and she had a plan, and Bruce happily volunteered to help her carry it out. When the solemn day of the wedding arrived, Kelly was very nervous from the early morning. The parents still hadn't met each other. The groom had never seen her mother. Everything felt strange. The girl was very worried about how everything would go, and even her beautiful white dress didn't bring her joy. She called her mother several times, offering to send a taxi for her. But the woman confidently and calmly replied, "Don't worry about me, honey. I'll get to the restaurant myself. Today is your happiest day. So dress up, get ready, and enjoy this moment." All the important guests had already gathered at the restaurant. Donald proudly worked with Margaret around the hall, dressed in the most expensive and branded outfits. They greeted the guests solemnly, all waiting for the arrival of the bride's mother. After their provocation at the dinner with the homeless people, they received no reaction from her, although the administrator informed them that Karen was pleasantly chatting with these guests, drinking and eating, engaging in conversation. This shocked the wealthy parents even more. What a disgrace! How could someone disrespect themselves enough to dine with homeless people from the streets? Although what could one expect from such a poor woman? Margaret laughed and whispered to her husband, "Imagine what this woman will look like when she arrives in her cheap car. Surely, she will be terribly dressed. I bet she'll have the cheapest jewelry, and will have to be related to her in the future. What a shame for our family." And then the restaurant door swung open, and Karen entered the hall. She was dressed in a gorgeous, expensive dress with an open back, accentuating every curve of her statuesque figure. A diamond necklace sparkled around her neck, and she held an elegant clutch in her hands. The restaurant guests observed the entering woman with interest and admiration. But what surprised them even more was her companion. It was the well-known businessman, Bruce. He affectionately held her arm, looked great, and engaged in a pleasant conversation with her. Donald was both impressed and astonished, and Margaret couldn't believe what she was seeing. Of course, the groom's parents recognized Karen, and now they didn't know what to do. How could they even explain the situation at the planned meeting of the parents? Stephen's father cursed to himself. Why did Karen come here at all? Did she decide to come to her son's wedding? But how did she even find out where this celebration would take place? I can imagine what will happen now. But Karen quickly greeted them and started looking for her daughter and the groom to congratulate them. And there they were, the newlyweds. She approached them, embraced her daughter tenderly, and then something unexpected happened. Stephen yelled, "Mom, you're alive. I can't believe it." And he collapsed on the floor, unconscious. Karen looked at the young man in amazement, recognizing her own son in his features, the son she had been separated from for many years. She cried, stroked his cheeks, kissed the mole on his forehead near the temple, a mole she remembered from childhood, and whispered, "My son, Stephen, my dear boy, is it really you? I can't believe it. So this is the man my daughter fell in love with. It's unbelievable. How many years I haven't seen you. How much I missed you. Please wake up." Kelly was trembling as if she had a fever. She couldn't understand how her mother could be Stephen's mother too. It must have been some mistake. This couldn't be happening. When Stephen came to, he was shocked. "Mom, let me hug you. I've dreamed of this for so many years. You're so beautiful. How did you find me? Wait, so you're Kelly's mom? Does that mean that Kelly and I are siblings? Oh, my God. But we love each other. We're already married. What will happen now? Mom, what's going to happen now? We dreamed of having children, of having a family." Kelly was crying. It felt like her family, her love, no longer existed. She and Stephen couldn't be together. They liked each other because they were brother and sister. What a nightmare. Karen realized that she needed to explain everything immediately before the newlyweds did anything. She stepped onto the stage and began speaking into the microphone. "Son, don't worry. You and Kelly are not blood relatives. So love each other and be happy." At this point, Kelly started shouting, "How do you mean, Mom? Why are you saying this? So, I'm not your biological daughter. Am I adopted? But how is that possible? What's even happening here? This isn't a wedding. It's like some kind of TV drama." Karen took a deep breath again. It's hard to make such confessions when strangers are staring at you and hearing you, and everyone with mouths open from surprise awaited the continuation of the story, feeling like spectators of some show. With a trembling voice, the woman began to explain. "To make everything clear to everyone, I'll start from the beginning. Once upon a time, I fell in love with my classmate, Donald, married him, and helped him become a successful man. After all, I used to be an economist myself. I loved my husband more than life itself, so I often sacrificed my own ideas and projects just to keep him happy. Then Stephen was born, and I stopped working in business to focus on raising our son. But my beloved husband decided to thank me for this by kicking me out of the house, taking away my share in the business, and stripping me of my maternal rights to erase me from their lives forever. Donald turned into a cruel man. Why? I don't know. He forbade me from seeing our son and ordered me to disappear from their lives forever. He said he would never give me the child. I tried to explain that our son would suffer without his mother and that I couldn't live without him. But it was all in vain. His guards even beat me up once. I was terrified and wandered around the train station. I had nowhere to go. Thanks to Donald's mother, Anna, she gave me some money for the road. She cried and apologized for her son's behavior. She was the only person in their family who understood me. But what could she do? Donald had intimidated her too. I cried constantly and boarded the first train to the suburbs, not knowing where I was going. It was on that train that I met Carl. He was returning home from the city with his little daughter, Kelly, and we struck up a conversation. I helped him calm the little girl down and feed her. Carl told me about himself. He was a widower raising his daughter alone. He talked about how hard it was to be alone, how he struggled with both work and the child. I also honestly told him everything about myself, and he felt sorry for me. He allowed me to stay at his house and helped me in every way. And I helped him with his daughter, gradually becoming attached to you, Kelly. You became like a daughter to me, always wanting to be carried by me and calling me mom. Carl persuaded me not to give up, and I decided to change my life. I managed to get a medical education and got a job as a nurse at the hospital. Carl and I got married, but it turned out that this wonderful man died 3 years later, and I took it very hard. I decided to adopt you, Kelly, and stayed in Carl's house. You were only 3 years old when your dad died, darling, and I always loved and will love you as my own daughter. Because I always remembered my son from whom I was separated and tried to give you, Kelly, all the love and affection that filled my heart. Forgive me, sweetheart, for not telling you the truth earlier, but I just couldn't do it. Because for me, you are my own daughter. That's how I see it. I didn't love your father, Kelly, but I was very grateful to him for the warmth and care he showed me. I take care of his grave and often think about him. I have such a strange feeling now, because I have 2 children, a son and a daughter, And I'm very happy about it. I love both of you and want you to be happy." Karen stepped down from the stage and hugged her son and daughter. They stood together for a long time, crying together, each thinking about their own past. Kelly wasn't angry at all. On the contrary, she was grateful that Karen raised her as her own daughter, when she could have just put her in an orphanage. She always felt genuine love and care from Karen. Bruce decided to calm down the guests a bit and announced from the stage, "Dear guests, the emotional moment of the celebration is over. As you can see, everything turned out well. Let's not forget why we are here. So I suggest we continue to have fun and celebrate the wedding. And of course, congratulations to Kelly and Stephen on their marriage. Let's turn on the music." The festivities continued, but the guests kept discussing all the details of this tangled family history. Most of them condemned Donald, considering him a bad person. They looked at him with disdain. He didn't know how to stay at this celebration anymore and soon quietly left with Margaret, realizing that they were unnecessary guests here today. The next day after the wedding, Stephen immediately went to his father. He needed to say everything to him. Margaret didn't want to let him into the house. She looked pale and frightened. "Stephen, please, don't go to your father. He's sick. He has high blood pressure. Why bring up the past now? After all, many years have passed." But the young man just clenched his fists and said quietly but firmly, "Get away from me. How I hate you. Finally, I said it. You're a greedy woman. You endured humiliation from Dad all your life and lived with him just for money. Aren't you disgusted with your life yourself?" Stephen rushed into his father's bedroom. He was lying in bed, with a wet towel on his forehead. But seeing his enraged son, he jumped up and hastily began to explain. "Son, listen to me. You've misunderstood everything. Karen didn't tell you everything right. I'll explain everything to you now." The boy was trembling as if in a fever. He shouted, "What can you explain to me, Dad? How can you explain that you're heartless? You deprived me of my mom. You ruined her life too. Why did you treat us like this? Tell me. Well, speak up. Find some explanation for your behavior. What attracted you to Margaret? How is she better than Mom? Why did you betray our family? And you've been lying to me shamelessly all my life. You tried to make me hate her. How repulsive you are to me now. Know that I despise you for this act." Donald couldn't remain silent after hearing such words from his son. After all, the man wasn't used to being reprimanded. Usually, it was the other way around. And he also started shouting back, "So, that's how you talk to your own father? Ha, son, you should be thanking me. I always loved you, provided for everything, bought you a car and an apartment. You had everything. Brand name clothes, expensive phones. What else did you need? And you say you despise me. I could have sent you to some private school abroad, as Margaret asked, but I didn't. You don't care about our relationship with your mom. As you can see, your mom is alive and well, and she even found a wealthy man. And she says she's a poor and unhappy woman." Stephen couldn't listen anymore to his father saying awful things about his mom. He took off his jacket, threw the phone and car keys in Donald's face, and shouted so loudly that the veins in his neck bulged. "Take your phone. I'll leave the keys to the apartment on the shelf and move out from there tomorrow. I don't need anything from you. And remember, you no longer have a son, and I no longer have a father. I'll never forgive you for what you did to Mom. And don't you dare say a single bad word about her." Stephen stormed out of the room and slammed the door hard. He ran out onto the street, shaking violently, running without understanding anything, as long as he had the strength. But when he got tired, he fell onto the dusty road and started yelling and crying. So much pain and resentment burned him for his dear mom. The young man couldn't come to terms with the fact that his own dad could do such a thing. Stephen returned home very late. He thought Kelly would be asleep by now, but no. The frightened tearful girl hugged him tightly around the neck and said, "Stephen, where have you been? I was so worried about you. Mom and I couldn't reach you on the phone. Uncle Bruce thought you were with Dad. He went to him, but you weren't there either. I was so scared." "Son, is it right to scare us like this? We were all very worried about you," said his mom. Stephen replied quietly, "Forgive me. I wasn't feeling well. Kelly, pack your things. We're moving out. I've stopped talking to Dad, so we need to save some money. I won't work at his company either, on principle." Bruce intervened, offering, "Why do you need to rent a place? I have a big mansion. There's enough space for everyone. Gradually, you'll be able to save up for your own place. And I'll help you with work. I need young specialists right now. I sincerely offer you this help, but the decision is up to you. Karen also lives with me. It'll be more fun together. Besides, you're all family to each other, and it would be very pleasant for me to become part of your family if you allow it. I understand that we've known each other very little, but we already know so much about each other, have experienced so many different emotions that it seems like we've known each other for a long time." Stephen shook hands with the businessman and, after consulting with his wife, replied, "We agree." Everyone moved into Bruce's mansion and began to get used to the new home. But Karen had one more important matter, and she asked her son, "Stephen, let's go visit Anna together. I've wanted to see her all these years, to say thank you. She did her best to protect me from her son and was kind to me." The young man was delighted, and they went together to visit his grandmother. Their meeting was very warm and emotional. Anna hugged Karen like a daughter, crying and saying, "Oh, my dear girl has returned. You're alive and well. How happy I am about that. Forgive me, Karen, for listening to my son back then and not telling Stephen anything. I regretted it many times later, seeing how much my grandson missed you, how desperately he lacked a mother's affection and love. I often thought that things could have been different. Maybe something could have been done. Anna, I'm grateful to you anyway. You were the only one who treated me well in that terrible situation. You rescued me and gave me money for the road. We couldn't have done anything back then. Donald had arrangements everywhere. I'm not angry with you, honestly. On the contrary, I came here to start talking to you and being friends again. If you need any help, just say. And also, meet Kelly. She's Stephen's wife now, and my daughter. I know it sounds strange, but we'll tell you everything now," Karen said. They all sat down together at the table, talked for a long time, cried and laughed. And at that moment, Anna felt so light and good. After all, her grandson was now back with his mom, and that was the most important thing. From that day on, they began to communicate often. Karen and the children helped Anna with everything, but most importantly, she now spent a lot of time with the people close to her. Donald felt very bad after the scandal and Karen's revelations at their son's wedding. Because of his poor health, he ended up in the hospital. The man constantly thought about his son's last words, which he screamed in his face. And perhaps, for the first time, he began to recall his life. And then he remembered Karen's swollen, tear-streaked face, how she crawled on the floor in front of him on her knees, grabbing his pants and begging, "Donald, please, reconsider. What are you doing? Don't separate me from our son, please. You know how much I love him. Well, if you want, we'll divorce, and I'll leave with Stephen. We'll never bother you again." But he disdainfully pushed away the sobbing wife and yelled, "We're already getting divorced, in case you haven't noticed. And yes, you'll indeed leave, and far away from us. You got that right. And you'll never get our son. Got it? That's how I've decided. That's it. Leave. I don't want to see you anymore." Only now did he wonder, why did he act like such a horrible person? Back then, he thought he was right about everything. His wife had bored him. After giving birth, she became fat and unattractive. She constantly talked about how well Stephen ate and slept. Where did the business lady go, who lived only for Donald. And then Margaret appeared in his life. Such a young, beautiful, and bold girl. It was she who told the businessman that they were made for each other, that he should kick his wife out of the house and send his son to a private boarding school. And then they would be happy. Amazingly, Margaret acted on the man like a drug. He literally couldn't live without her. All it took was for her to get upset and leave, not answer his calls, and he was ready to do anything just to get her back. Their love was like an obsession, more like an addiction. Donald agreed with her, and Karen became so repulsive to him that he treated her so despicably and simply got rid of her. Of course, he later saw how much his son suffered without his mom, how he drifted away from him. And to somehow explain to the child why his mom wasn't with them, he shamelessly lied to him about her. All his life he bought everything for his son, essentially trying to buy his love. And now, after Karen appeared, his son rejected him. His mother had long stopped talking to him, and no one in business wanted to have anything to do with him. Margaret no longer looked at him like before, who needed a frail and sick man. She visited him less and less in the hospital, and then announced that she was leaving for another man. Now Donald was completely alone, with his conscience and illnesses. Perhaps this was the price he paid for all the evil he had done in life. Sometimes he would come to Bruce's mansion in the evenings, just pacing around and trying to peek through the windows. Sometimes he saw through the curtains how Karen was cooking something in the kitchen. And then they all had dinner together in the big dining room, chatting with interest because they had a family now. They were all together. And he returned to his empty house, where no one was waiting for him anymore. Drank his medicine, checked his blood pressure, and he really didn't want to live. On the other hand, businessman Bruce unexpectedly gained a large and close-knit family, and he was very happy about it. He appointed Stephen as the head of the sales department, and Kelly diligently studied to finish university and obtain her diploma. Karen no longer worked as a nurse. She became the homemaker in this house, and everything worked out great for her. Cooking turned out to be another one of her favorite hobbies, and now she delighted the whole family with new interesting dishes. She was also very happy that her son and stepdaughter were with her, that everything was good with them. And sometimes she dreamed of grandchildren. It didn't happen right away for Bruce and Karen to develop a relationship. It probably took several years for them to get to know each other well. At their age, what mattered most were not emotions, but trust, support, and warm heart-to-heart communication. Bruce loved and cherished his Karen, patiently waiting for her to agree to marry him.